Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast, a human element series, episode 149. I'm Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer LLC and the Innocent Lives Foundation. And I've been hosting this podcast for way too long, since way back in 2009 when we did podcasts on stone tablets. My co-host Maxie's not here. You probably noticed that already. She is traveling right now, so she could not be with us this month. I'm sure you will all miss her, but we look forward to having her back in future episodes. So before we get to our wonderful guest, let me just mention a few house cleaning and announcements. This podcast is sponsored by the one and only socialengineer.com. You can find us at social-engineer.com. As you know, we are your trusted information security vendors that love to talk about the human element of security. So we do managed voice phishing, or what we call vishing, and actual email phishing programs to help teach your population about security awareness and how they can be more aware of the threats that come from these type of attacks. All of our employees here are trained social engineers, so we really love what we do. We're certified and trained in all of these things, and we love to talk to you about adversarial simulations and ways we can keep your people safe. You can check out more on our website, social-engineer.com. Did you know that we run a Slack channel? There's about 1,000 people in there now. Every day talking about vishing, phishing, pretexting. We've had job postings for careers. We've had 5 people find brand new jobs on the Slack channel. All sorts of things about conferences coming up, not just our own, but others in the community. So come on in. You can check it out in the show notes. I'm pointing down. I think it's down there, but I don't know. The show notes has the link for that. And we always want to say a big shout out and thank you to the band Clutch. If you don't know who they are, shame on you. Shame, shame, shame. But you should go find out who they are. And you can do that at pro-rock.com. They're just about to enter a 30-year tour. Not for 30 years. It's their 30-year anniversary. So, but man, they have been on tour for about 30 years. But anyhow, go check them out. You can come to one of the shows. You'll probably see me at many of them. I will be there. They are the music at the beginning and the end of this podcast, and we love them very, very much. And last but not least, don't forget to check out innocentlives.org. That organization is just amazing there with my team is really, really phenomenal. They help to unmask and identify anonymous child predators, working very close with law enforcement to ensure that the people who are hurting kids can be brought to justice and put where they belong, which is behind prison. We are a 501c3, so any help you can give, whether you want to volunteer or donate, is something that can really, really help. And even spreading the word can really help about what we're doing there. So we thank everyone for that. I just looked outside because it's a big thunderstorm. And my guest, which we're about to get to, is also in a big thunderstorm. So we're hoping that we'll be able to stay connected. So let me introduce Teresa. I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting Teresa just a couple months ago when I went on her amazing podcast. But she is the founder of Handwriting PI, which is a full-service handwriting analysis business. Didn't even know something like that existed. So if you're like me, you're going to be fascinated by this. But not only does she do handwriting analysis, but she's a professional personality investigator who can spot a lot of the red flags from people who might have dangerous personalities, which if you're a fan of that topic, you've probably been reading my blogs on Psychology Today that all is about that very thing. And it's very, very important that we know that, especially in the workplace or home. So she can help people identify strengths and uncover what is holding you back and maybe what is going on in your life that can make your goals just come true. She's been interested in this since she was 14. We're going to definitely talk about that because that's a really young age to be interested in this field that I didn't even know existed. And led her to hosting her own podcast, which I had the pleasure of being on. It's called The Most Unusual Tea Party, just the letter T, because she uses that letter to unlock pieces of a person's story, which is fascinating to listen to. If you want to hear scary things revealed about my life, you should go listen to that podcast and all the other episodes that she has there. Teresa, thank you for coming on the show this month.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I am just delighted to be a part of this fascinating podcast that you have.
I didn't even know this was a real thing, right? You see it on TV, and then shows, and you're like, oh, that looks cool, but can it really work that way? So I entered your podcast with the thought of, I really want this to work, but I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to really try my hardest to lie to you. And I got caught. And this is what I do for a living. So I need to start at the beginning. Mm-hmm. How at 14 which was probably just like what, 3 or 4 years ago, did you decide that you were going to be a handwriting expert?
Well, to be fair, at 14, I didn't realize this is actually what I was going to do as a profession. It was just something that I was with my grandma, and she was a very interesting lady. And we happened to come across somebody who was doing it. And she said, "Oh, get yours done." And so at 14 years old, I got my first handwriting analysis done. And it was like, how did they know this from just this little sample that I provided? It was actually crazy to me. And of course, at 14 years old, what's one thing that every 14-year-old wants is for somebody to really get them and to understand them.
Yeah.
Right? So I was hooked. That to me was just like, yeah, I think there's something to this. And so for the next number of years, 30, 40 years, I just kept paying attention to it. I would read books, I would take courses, and of course, I practiced. And that is the big part about handwriting analysis, is just practicing it, starting to train your eye to see what is normal, what's abnormal, what's a baseline, just starting to recognize what shouldn't actually be there as compared to what is.
That's a really cool story, because it's not often that at that age you can get introduced to something like that is gonna now for you has affected your whole existence. I mean, this is what you do now because of one little stopover with your grandma when you were 14.
Exactly, right? I took a detour. There was a lot of other stuff that I did in between. And then at the end of the day, and when I finally decided to start handwriting PI, it kind of came out of an oopsie where it was like, how did I actually not look at the handwriting? There was 2 people in particular. And it's like, how did I actually not look at their handwriting? And it ended up having huge repercussions in my life and my daughter's life. And I'm like, wait a moment, I've strayed too far from my roots. And so that's when I actually started going back into it and thinking, no, there's so much value here. And I think the time is right to have it open up to the world and become more popular again.
I love that story because sometimes it's the passion that I think everyone can see or hear if they're not watching the podcast that you have. Definitely comes from where it affected your life. And then you said, ooh, I'm going to use this to help other people.
Yes.
So it wasn't like, ooh, this is a way to make a butt ton of money. It was like, no, this is a way to help a lot of people. And it just ended up being a career that now is truly a fascinating job.
Exactly. And it's just led me down so many paths that I never could have predicted. It's just been amazing.
So how does one practice handwriting analysis? Because that doesn't even make sense. The words make sense, but I don't know how that is. Like, I look at my handwriting and I don't understand it at all. So I don't know, how does one practice that skill?
Right. And I look at your handwriting and I clap my hands in delight because it's such exciting handwriting to see. It's really something where you just start looking at all the handwriting that comes your way. So if you get a thank you note that's handwritten, grocery lists that you see that are handwritten, envelopes that are handwritten, you just start looking at it and noticing what stands out to me the most. So way back when, I would see these things and then I would go back and I'd look at the books, right? I'd start to say, this really was weird. What does that mean? And then I'd go and start checking it out and looking at it and just slowly building up that memory and that that recognition of different traits in handwriting to the point where you start to get to see it and you can really see everything and you start to, perceive fairly quickly whether or not this is really scary writing or is this not scary writing. And that's always kind of my base point now is this scary or not? And then we move forward from there.
So that raised a question in my mind. What indicates scary versus non-scary handwriting?
Yeah. So, how for psychopaths, there's the scale, there's the test where they say, if you score a certain point on this, that's the tipping point, and now you're into the territory. Those are very much related to emotions and empathy and how people deal with that and expressing it or repressing it. That is very much reflected in handwriting. And so what we're looking for is the signs that show that it's repressed or controlled, or on the alternative, sort of like if it's repressed and pushed down, but also explosive. And there's certain signs in handwriting that'll show when they just can't control it and it'll get explosive. And so those are the kind of things that we're looking for. Like for an example, I'm going to talk about your handwriting, Chris, if you're okay with that.
Sure. Yeah. We did it on your podcast.
We did.
So I'm fine with it.
And I think this is a really great example because your handwriting was really exciting. And in that, I immediately recognized there was a lot of signs there of like deception, where, it was like clear that you were, not really comfortable having everything on the table and sharing everything with everybody. But there was no warning signs that really came across and said, this is a dangerous personality. Mm. And when we first looked at it, I said, there was a comparison to Bernie Madoff, but there was none of the red flags that his has. And one of the ones that Bernie Madoff has is a lot of his ending letters drop below that line of writing. If you picture that imaginary line that we're all supposed to follow, most letters end at that line. We're not talking about your Y's and your G's, but, your M's, your N's, your T's, your S's, they end on the line. If you look at Bernie Madoff's, his drop below. Huh. And there's no reason for that. And that's actually a really big red flag. When you see that consistently, it means something is going on that they're keeping below the surface, and it's not good. So that's one of the first red signs that you can, or red flags that you see for somebody who could be a dangerous personality. That
is, okay. So if somebody knows this, so let's say if Bernie knew this knowledge, could you focus enough to make sure that doesn't happen so you can fool somebody, or do you just always fall back into your comfort baseline?
Yes. So there's 2 points to that, Chris. One is they could do it for a limited time. So if they're really conscious of it for a little bit, it's going to be very, very controlled. And it's going to come across in their writing that they're being very controlling and very careful. And that's why if we see something that is like picture perfect, it is exactly like it's taught in a textbook, that's actually a warning sign. Because that person is exhibiting so much control that now we're scared. When are they going to explode?
Wow.
So
that's
they can control
I have a card sitting right here from somebody that I kept it because it was so neat. Like, I'm going to cover her name, but I just want you to see this. Like, it was so neat. That's handwriting. I can't really see it. Yeah. Wait, you can't see it?
Yeah.
Hang on, I'll move it closer.
No, it's a little blurry on my
Let me just screen. See. I just want to make sure I don't reveal her name. So I'm going to, let's see. Ooh, there we go.
Oop, there we go. Yeah, it's kind of blurry. I can see that it's definitely straight lines going on and very consistent. Yeah.
When I first got this, I thought it was printed. Like, I thought she printed it on a printer because it was so neat. I'm like, no human can write like this. Like, this is unbelievable. And then I'm like, wow, and it's just so, like, now, okay, granted, the paragraphs don't line up in squares. Like, the first sentence is in more on the one, and then the second sentence is out more, and then the third sentence is in more. So it's not like it's a perfect square, but the letters are just like, wow.
And Chris, that's awesome, because that's actually the second point. What you were asking about is, can somebody hide it? And that's the second point that I was going to come to, is you can hide it on one level. You can say, okay, I'm going to be really careful in this regard, but there's other ways that it's going to come through. And so that irregular, margin that you're talking about, and if that's on the left-hand side of the page, that's very specific meaning, right? As opposed to on the right-hand side.
Yeah, it's on the left. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where you start to look at it, and you can pick up different things about that person. Well, it's actually the same thing about that person, just in a different way. So there's multiple ways to come to the same conclusion.
So is there any scientific studies done on this that talk about the accuracy of it? Because, like, I could see this being a huge deal for corporations. Like, I'm a small company, but if I could have any tools at my disposal that could tell me if the person I'm interviewing is going to be a nutcase after I hire them, right? Boy, that would be like worth something to me, because I've had some horror stories of people who've come in and just been like terribly arrogant or terrible employees and, stealing things from you and stuff. And it's like, boy, if I could have foreseen that, I would have avoided a year, 2 years of headaches.
Yeah, exactly. So there are different studies that have come up around handwriting. Unfortunately, it gets really murky when it comes into the accuracy of it because so much is dependent on the handwriting analyst. It's very much, any of the softer sciences, so much depends on who it is that's doing it. And that's where you want to do your due diligence. Make sure you're, working with somebody who does have the experience and who has a track record. For me personally, I when I'm working with people, I say it's going to be about 80% accurate. There's always a room for error there. And that other 20% is where I get to learn and grow and see how did I miss it and, what combination leads us to that. So for me personally, I run about 80% accuracy. I have run different promotions where I talk to different companies and I'll say, I'll do one for free. If you find that it's not accurate, no charge. But if you find it is accurate and helpful, then let's work together. Yeah. And that's a very good way to market myself because it's very seldom. Actually, I've never had somebody say this isn't accurate ever.
So I'm gonna give you some high praise for a second, but I also want to also fascinate at how similar our fields are in that respect, right? So there's a lot of people who come into information security, especially social engineering. They have not spent the time to teach themselves the science that is needed to be good at this job. And then they make wild, boisterous claims about, 100% win all the time, never fail. And I look at those people and I go, oh my God, like what is the marketing message there? Like you're telling me that you're an infallible human. You are the one on earth. You are the second coming of the Messiah because you are infallible, right? And I see that and then it bothers me. But then to have someone like you that says, look, I'm willing to stand up and go 80%, and that's about as good as you can get with humans, dealing with humans. I love that messaging because that says that, look, all science, it's accurate till it's not, right? It's accurate till it's not, right? And there are studies done on so many different parts of, one of my good friends is Joe Navarro. So many studies done on nonverbal body language and things like that you could say, okay, this is 90-something% accurate, but it's not 100. It's 90% because there's always going to be that outlier that doesn't exist. In we just saw it for the first time. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I think about David Matsumoto's research into how blind people born blind, show the same surprise and pride nonverbals when they win at something than someone who's got sight. Now, before that, many scientists said, well, they're blind, they can't show the same nonverbals. Matsumoto did this 10-year research, showed, bam, here it is. And now you could see clearly, blind Olympians in the Special Olympics, when they win, they do the same hands up, the big eyes, the surprise, and they've never seen that face. And I'm like, I know that's off a tangent, but
fascinating.
I'm saying this because I love people like you that do that market that way because it's so accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that's not a tangent at all because that is the foundation of handwriting analysis. Really? Well, one of the foundations. There's really a few others, but one of them comes back to universal gestures, right? There are universal behaviors that no matter who you are anywhere in the world, it is consistent. And that's what you're just talking about. A blind person still expresses that elation and that joy the same way. And so when you're writing on paper, the same characteristics will be shown no matter who you are, no matter where you were born. Joy shows up on paper exactly the same way in everybody. So it's very similar to what you're saying there, where it's there are some things that are just everybody. It's universal. It isn't based on gender, race, or nationality.
Right. It's like Dr. Ekman's research into facial expressions. Gender, race, religion, color, whatever. When you're happy, your face moves in that way. When you're sad, your face moves in that way. When you're angry, your face moves in that way. You have the same expressions. Now, the reasons we feel those things may be completely different, but we express it the same way. And I always found that to be if you could back something up by science, then for me, it adds a relevance like what we're talking about here. I'm thinking right away, as soon as you started talking, I'm thinking, wow, I can use this in hiring people. like if I were to
Yep,
say someone, write me one
absolutely.
paragraph before we interview about your perfect day at work. And if I were to be able to look at that and go, oh man, this person's going to be a nutter when they enter my company. Like, just be like, hey, thank you for the great
Yes.
interview. We'll let you know if we need, if we want to move forward, and just go away.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, a really important thing. Like for me, this is before, and it's actually what led me, one of the stories that led me to be opening up Handwriting PI, is if I'm looking to go to an employment, looking at a new boss, I want to see their handwriting. Because if I see this random capital letter popping up, that's a warning sign for me. As an employee working for somebody else, I can't do that because I'm a rule follower. And that random capital all over the place tells me that that person isn't.
Yeah, I actually hung if you noticed, I hung my head in a little bit of shame when you said that, because I'm like, oh, wait, that was one of my things. I had random capitals everywhere.
Not shame. You did. You totally did. And if I was an employee and you were my boss, that's a little bit of a red flag for me, because I know that as a rule follower, it's hard for me to work with somebody.
Any one of my employees who's listening to this, just to skip over the next 2 minutes, okay? To skip over. You don't have to worry about this part. That's fine. Okay?
Right. So, but that's the flip side, right? As an employee, you can use it on your boss to say, is this actually going to be the right fit for me? Conversely, if I'm hiring somebody or looking to collaborate with somebody, or even in relationships, or what I love to see is that in my kids, because not being a ruler follower has its advantages, and it pushes me out of my comfort zone, and it does add excitement to my day. So in context, that can be a really good thing. It's just not for me as a boss, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's just a great way of being able to say, this is important to me or this isn't. And does my personality jive in this context?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating point, because like my COO is a rule follower, right? He really is a rule follower. But one of the things that attracted me to him when I met him, before he worked for me like 8 years ago, was that he constantly put himself in situations that made him uncomfortable to expand his horizons. So I said, here's a guy who's so controlled, like in the DISC profiling, he's a C. He's a really high C. So organized, so lists, bullet points, color-coded stuff. Everything has to be perfectly organized. You have to finish a thought once it started, like stuff that blows my mind because I can't think like that. But at the same time, if there's this uncomfortable path, he runs towards it so he can say, well, at least I tried that. Now, I know I don't like it, but I tried it, right? And it just expands his experience horizons. And I'm like, that kind of a guy could make me 1,000 times better. And I hired him, and now he's my COO, because he helps keep the organization in the guidelines that we set. But he's also not afraid to say, okay, let's try this really difficult thing. Let's take this risk.
Exactly.
And that I would be fascinated to see his handwriting.
As long as he's in control.
Yeah, to see it, and see it, like how much of that is like he's forcing himself, or how much of that feels good for him,
Right? As long as he can be in control of the expansion of his own personal boundaries.
I found that. Yeah, I found that the hard way. Like when he first started, I would do things like, okay, look, I'm setting up this speech for you on this day. I want you to go do this. And he would just be so nervous and upset. But then when I went to him and said, hey, I really want you to give this speech. Are you comfortable with doing this topic? And if so, what day works for you? That control made it so much better for him. So I still put him in an uncomfortable circumstance, but I was able to get, the compliance I wanted by giving that little bit of control over. Man, if he's listening to this, I am screwed.
Exactly.
He's going to be like, you've been doing this for 6 years? What?
You've been what?
You're ruining me here, Teresa. All these employees that are going to watch this, they're going to be like, what? Half my company resigns after this podcast. I'm calling you. Okay? Thank you.
All right, well, I'll be here to help you hire them again. Get back on track.
That's great. Okay. So I keep hinting at this, but I'm going to just directly ask it. So is part of what Handwriting PI does as a service is analyze handwriting for people that may be getting hired to determine if they're good for that fit or not?
Yes.
Because that is...
Yes.
Because to me, it's like Because if you weren't doing it, I was going to be like, listen, you need to be adding this to your website today, because that to me sounds like something that, again, you're saying 80%, but I'm saying, look, if I make my people take a DISC test and I have a handwriting analysis and I have visual interviews where I can read nonverbals, I have 3 arrows in my quiver that can help me hit the bullseye, as opposed to just relying on one. And I love that.
Yes. Yeah. And you've hit the nail right on the head. Handwriting analysis, it works so beautifully in conjunction with other forms of assessment. And it can also help to really back up impressions and results. So anytime a person is taking an assessment and they're the ones doing it, you're relying on that person being self-aware and being honest.
Right. Yes. Yeah,
Right.
It happens to me with DISC all the time, because with the DISC test, you're saying to someone, go in here and pick the word that describes you the most and pick the word that describes you the least, right? And I had an employee, and I won't say gender just so nobody, if anyone listens to this, they don't think it's them, but I had an employee that we sent the DISC test to before they started. They took it, and it said, oh, they're this kind of a person. And then when they started, I'm like, oh, no, there's just no way that fits, because I have 2 other people that are just like this, and they're nothing like that person. They must have put the answers that they thought I wanted to hear on that test. So I love that point, because with self-analysis assessments, they really are only as good as, like I didn't try to write neat, but I tried my hardest to lie to you in my assessment.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I even went through a couple iterations, like where I planned the lie. I said, okay. I'm just going to tell people in case you go listen to it. Like I wrote about Dr. Ekman because he's a good friend of mine. And then I wrote the wrong place that he lives. And I thought that's such a small detail that you would have to know him personally to know that he doesn't live in this city, but he lives in this other city. And I'm like, that's so small, because everything else before that was true. And I'm like, this is going to be impossible. She's never going to catch it. And then when you were like, so I'm feeling like the lie is somewhere, and you started circling that area, I'm like, there's no way she knows it. I'm like, there's no way. And then when you're like, I think the lie is this part, and I'm like, what the heck? It was like, that doesn't even make sense to me. Felt like witchcraft, I got to say.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people think. And oddly enough, in the history of graphology, that's what we've been labeled with, is witchcraft, or fortune telling is a big one. And we were actually banned in Germany under Adolf Hitler.
No,
handwriting
really?
analysis was banned as a form of fortune telling, which we totally are not. Like, I cannot predict the future. The only thing that I can tell you is who you are right now. And if you take then an extension of that, the idea of, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. That's the only kind of fortune telling we can do. But of course, it's not written in stone, because people can change at the drop of a hat, right?
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. That's an interesting piece of history.
Yes, it is. It also really forced us to go underground, and it really took a hit, right? The whole forward momentum of it and getting it accepted and moved into society as a whole, it took a big hit at that point.
So how long has this been around?
Forever. Like a really long time.
I mean, really? People were analyzing handwriting like 1,000 years ago?
Well, yes and no. They certainly recognized, like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, they recognized that handwriting was unique to different people, and that it was a reflection of that person who was writing it. Certainly Aristotle, Euclid, they all mentioned something about handwriting, showing what type of person it was that was writing it.
Wow. So for you, when you're doing an analysis, do you need to understand the words? Like, can you analyze handwriting in a different language, even if you don't speak that language?
Yes, you absolutely can. So just to give you an idea of what I do when I first get a sample is I don't even want to read it. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to get sucked into the world of the words and the story that they're telling me. So it's going to be flipped upside down right away.
Upside down?
Upside down. I just turn the whole sample upside down because that way I can't read it. There's no way that I can get looped into the story. And then I'm going to take a look to see what really stands out. It's sort of like, you know, those pictures, I don't know if they're still around, but they used to be where you'd have them and they looked just like geometric patterns. But if you kind of blurred your eyes a little bit, you would see a different picture.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what you do with handwriting analysis is when you get it, you turn it upside down and you kind of look at it without looking at it to see what is popping out at me, what stands out. And that's where that practice comes into play of starting to recognize that doesn't belong there.
How do you do that upside down? Like, I would feel like all of the things that you pointed out about me would be so much harder to read, like the T's and how I did it, or the slanting in the wrong direction. You know, like that would be so much harder upside down to do than.
Well, again, that's where your practice comes in, right? Just that training of your eye to be able to recognize it upside down. And when you do it enough, that becomes more natural. And some of the times when I flip them right side up and I start looking at them, I'm like, oh, whoa, what is this now? What am I looking at? And it takes a few moments to actually get reorientated to see what's the same thing when it's right side up as I was seeing when it was upside down.
So that's a fascinating first step, because oftentimes when I'm doing a nonverbal analysis, the first thing I'll do when watching a video is do it muted.
Yeah.
Because the story sometimes, especially if it's like one of those videos where like a mom killed her baby or something, and you're trying to watch it for incongruencies, the story can be so emotional, because I have children myself that I find if I listen to the story, I can start getting biased right away.
Yes.
So I'll try to watch the video with the sound completely muted and then take notes and be like, oh, okay, at 2 minutes I saw, you know, a head nod, but a shoulder shrug, you know, and then when I listen to it, see if the words make the nonverbal incongruent or congruent. So it sounds very similar to that.
It is. It really is. Because there have been surprises when I flip them around and I start reading the words and I'm like, wow, I had no idea that this was going to take this tangent. And I think the biggest one is sometimes where so one of the things that you can really tell really quickly, really easily in a handwriting analysis or a handwriting sample is the emotional state of somebody. Are they feeling up or are they feeling down? That's a quick look at a piece of paper. If the line's going on an uphill slant, then you know that they're feeling positive, they're upbeat. And if it's going downhill, they're feeling a little less happy.
Wow.
They're kind of going down in the dumps. So, you know, if I'm looking at a sample, I'm like, oh, this looks like a really super, you know, positive person. Or conversely, oh, maybe they're not doing so good. And then you flip it around and you read it. And sometimes you'll have this, you know, looks like everything is happy. And yet they're writing about terrible things. And I'm like, wow, okay, not expecting that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where you start to say how, you know, anyway, there's different tangents that you go into.
No, that's interesting,
point,
because that would be incongruent, right? Because you would see,
exactly.
Like it's almost like when you analyze videos of psychopaths, you know, non-verbally, you see very happy non-verbals, but then when you hear the words, you're like, oh my God, like you're happy about the most horrific things. But, you know, I watched some interviews of those, like some of these guys that are in prison right before death row, and they're being interviewed and they're talking about their crimes, and you mute it and you watch them like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. They had extreme happiness on their face when they talked about certain things, and you're like if I didn't know who that guy was, I'd be thinking he was talking about a date with a wonderful girl where they had a beautiful picnic, you know. And then you listen to it, and you're like, oh my gosh, that brought him happiness. Like you're like, that dude is messed up, right? Like
exactly.
So that must be the same thing you're saying here.
That is exactly it, and so well put. That's what happens, right? Is there's that incongruency, and it's kind of funny how sometimes you'll see, like, there's some people who get really excited about lying, especially like in my podcast, I spot the lie for people, and so I'm inviting my guests to lie to me. I'm encouraging them, and it's totally okay. It's sanctioned lying. And some people get super excited about that. And that's how they give themselves away, because all of a sudden that is just jumping up off of the line, and they're so excited about it.
It's almost vertical, right? They wrote it in a 90-degree angle.
Exactly. They're just so happy to actually have a sanctioned lie. So it's really fascinating to watch and see how it comes across.
Wow. Okay, so you read it upside down. Then you turn it over and you read the words to see if there's congruency or incongruency to what you determined. Then what's the next stage?
Well, actually, I don't read the words yet. So I'm going to turn it back the right side, and then I'm going to see now what pops out at me. What else really stands out for me? And I like to go to the letter T. And that is not because my name starts with the T. That's not it. The letter T is just a super expressive letter because you can write it over 450 different ways. Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I can imagine 3 or 4. 450 different ways for one letter.
For one letter.
Okay.
So it's really expressive. So that's always going to be a letter that I want to look at right side up and start comparing it to see what is it telling me? What message am I getting? And so then that's when I start to look a little bit more at some specific details is when it's right side up.
Because I think in my sample I gave you, I had probably about 300 different types of T's in one paragraph. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, give or take.
It was like a little ridiculous.
Yes.
And when you started pointing them out, I was like, I don't even know I did that. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, yeah.
Yeah, because you're a chameleon. That's just what you do,
Yeah,
right?
it's weird, though, to see it.
Don't pin you down.
Okay, so you start looking at T's, and that gives you at least some indicator if
That's
you were
right.
right or wrong on some of the other things that you were guessing.
Yeah. Yeah, it starts to fill in some of those, the holes in the analysis. And that's where we start to look at other things too, right? There's different things that we want to watch, and you'll only see them when it's right side up. So that's when you're looking for specifics, and it just fills in the holes. And that after I've done that and I'm pretty happy with everything, and if there's any red flags, I'm looking to check it out to see, is there anything that supports it or would negate it? Because sometimes just seeing one thing doesn't actually mean this is a terrible, horrible, awful person. It just means, it happened. And that's when I'm going to, because I want to note those things. Is there something there that I actually not sure it makes sense? Is it going to be a red flag? Is it a warning sign or not? And that's when I'm going to read it to see, does it make sense for this person to suddenly lose control of the pen or not? And if it really doesn't make any sense for them to lose control of the pen or have a stutter or anything like that. And a stutter is like when they're writing and then there's a giant pause. And when somebody pauses, your hand actually keeps moving forward. So there's a pause in your writing, but your hand moves forward. And then you're going to start writing again. So you have a larger space between words. So I call that a stutter. And I want to see, does it make sense for that person to stutter right here? Are they thinking about, how do I spell that word? Are they, is it something emotional, or does it make sense? So that's when I read the words to see these things that I've spotted. Does it make sense for it to be there or not?
So is that the last stage, is reading the words?
And then I put it together.
Really? So
That
the
is.
last stage is
Yep.
reading the words. Okay.
Last
This
stage,
is
yep.
fascinating. And then from there is where you'll kind of get your clear picture of your analysis. So in looking at like a paper, like a sample I gave you, which I think was 2 or 3 paragraphs, how long does that take you to do that process you just said?
So it kind of depends in the context that we work it with. You were talking about, working with businesses. There's 2 different ways that I work with businesses. So if I get one sample, and if we're looking at somebody who is more for a management position, we're going to want to do a lot more in-depth work with that. And I'm going to put a sample up and I'm going to look at it over a series of days, and I'm going to just really take stock of it. So ultimately, it probably would take me about a week to do. But intermittently, I'm just going to have it there. I'm getting familiar with it. And then when I really sit down to pull it all together, it's a good, I would say for me, it's still about a 3-hour process.
Now, you were saying something about like the 2 ways you work with companies.
Right. So and the second way that I work with companies is to do a really quick analysis for them. So if there's something that you're looking for in an employee, or there's something that you really don't want in an employee, then I can just do a really quick assessment, and those go really fast, where we're just going to look for any red flags, or we're going to look for the characteristic that says, yes, this person is this, or no, it's not. And so we just go through and scan really fast, and it's really good for companies that have a lot of applications, because we can help narrow down, or I can help narrow down who you're going to ask for an interview.
That is fascinating. I mean, like, I feel like you should be in touch with recruiters.
Yes.
And I want to put you in touch with our recruiter, because I think that would be an amazing marriage, the stuff that you do and the stuff that she does, because she's amazing at finding the most unbelievable talent, our recruiter. But then having that as part of her arsenal would make her mind-numbing.
Unstoppable.
Yeah, seriously, because she already is unbelievable. And That I'm gonna. Yeah, we need to do that after this podcast. We need to do that. Okay, so
For sure.
I'm
Sounds good.
gonna do that. Teresa, I just looked at the time and realized, like, holy mackerel, we've been talking for almost 50 minutes, and I could probably talk to you for another 3 hours because time flies. You are amazingly positive. You have like awesome smile, and you're so knowledgeable. Like, I just feel like I just soaked in about a college worth of education on handwriting. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. And thank you. No, thank you. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're enjoying it and that you found it informative because it is a fascinating topic.
is.
I love it.
If people want to know more about you, where can they go to follow you or find out more about your work and the things that you do?
For sure. So the only social media that I'm active on is Instagram. So you can find me at handwriting_PI. And I do have a website as well that you can go and see what services that I offer, and you can find my podcast there. And the website is just handwritingpi.ca.
And you should definitely check out the podcast because it's fascinating and amazing, and you will be a little scared, but you should do it anyway.
Yes. The number of times I've heard people say, wow, I don't know how you did that.
Probably every time.
It's amazing.
Probably every time. So, Teresa, I have a couple last questions we like to ask our guests. So,
Sure.
Coming up in this from 14 on, when you had that first experience, you probably had a lot of people that you would consider mentors or people you looked up to that helped you get to where you are today. Who would you say is your greatest mentor? Someone that you really
Sheila
look
Lowe.
up to? Sheila, wow, that
Sheila
was fast.
Lowe. Yeah, Sheila Lowe, absolutely hands down, 100%. She has just been such a pioneer in the whole handwriting analysis world. She's the president of the American Handwriting Analysis Foundation. And even though I am a Canadian, I am a member of that foundation as well. She has written incredible books on this subject that still I just will revert to and reread and reread. She has so much knowledge that I just absolutely adore her. So she also writes other books, and she has fantastic handwriting course that you can take. I just can't say enough wonderful things about Sheila. She is an amazing lady.
That's awesome. Thank you. That was really fast too. So you obviously really do like her because some people have to
I
go,
really do.
Let me think about that. But that is really phenomenal. I love that. So let's talk about some books. Our listeners, we've been doing this podcast for 12 years. And we formed a list of books that have been recommended. And they could be anything. It could be about the topic we spoke about, but it can also just be a fantasy book that you love, whatever. We don't care. It could be a couple of them. But what are your favorite books that you have read that you think other people should read?
Okay. All right. So I could do a couple of books.
Sure. Why not?
I love books. I think books are just such a beautiful gateway to see into people's minds, right? So I would say a book that everybody should read, and it's one that I've only recently discovered. It's called The Wisdom of Psychopaths by Kevin Dutton.
I'm writing this down.
Yeah, The Wisdom of Psychopaths by Kevin Dutton. Just hugely fascinating. And of course, it just applies so much to what I do anytime we're talking about crazy people and psychopaths. It's fascinating. So that one I think everybody should read just so you know what to watch for because not all psychopaths are criminals. They can be successful people as well. And I think my other most favorite book that I've had like forever and a day would be Illusions by Richard Bach.
Illusions, Richard Bach. Okay, I love when I get book recommendations that I haven't read because now I have something to add to my large library and things I have to read. So that's wonderful.
Intriguing.
I haven't read either of those.
Oh, you are in for a treat.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Illusions is just a little tiny book that when I read it, and I don't know how old I was really young at the time, and it just kind of opened my mind to that idea that, hey, things don't have to be what I think they are.
Yeah, that is cool. You sound like you had a fascinating life growing up into who you are today. I bet it would make an amazing story, maybe for another podcast or something. I don't know, but it sounds like it is.
Thank you. It's so funny when you're doing it and growing up, you think it's normal, and it's not until later that it's like, oh, actually, that was kind of unusual.
I'm going to ask you a question you don't have to answer, but how old's your daughter?
Sure. My daughter is 21.
So in her growing up through being a teenager, since she's past that stage now, how much did she like having a mom that can read anything she wrote and automatically determine what the heck if she was telling the truth or lying or
Right? You know, what's really funny is apparently I kept it secret from my kids. So both my son and my daughter, apparently they had no idea about any of this. And it wasn't until recently where they were like, this is really cool. We had no idea. And now, of course, now they're just like, anytime, my daughter in particular, because she's one who we had a really bad experience with somebody. So now she's like, anytime she's going to anybody new, she's sending me their handwriting sample and she's like, tell me about this person.
That
like,
is amazing.
I want to know. So she just loves it. She loves it because it just gives her a deeper insight. So she'll send me a sample and say, how am I doing, Mom?
That's great. Yeah, when your kids can,
Yeah,
I find my daughter does similar things where she'll like mention a friend's name and be like, if you find anything on them, let me know if they're safe. Like hinting, like, go dox that guy, and his dad and find out if they're safe or whatever. So she knows I'll do it as soon as she says a name, especially if it's a boy. So
that's right. Yeah. And I think it's so wonderful that for my daughter, it's just becoming instinctive for her, right? She's just instinctively asking for a handwriting sample, saying, can you just write something for me? And, she's learning, she's starting to pick it up too.
That's
so it's
awesome.
really fascinating.
That's great. Teresa, this has been a
Thank
fascinating conversation. I can't thank you enough. It is wonderful to get to chat with you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. This has really been delightful. I've just so excited to be a part of your podcast. You're a wonderful host.
Thank you. Everyone, check out handwritingpi.ca so you can get some great information on the services Teresa offers. And if you're really interested in this, if you're listening and you're a business, you definitely want to check out these things because they can help you hire better. Thank you for joining us this month. Please, again, shout out to Clutch. Check them out at pro-rock.com, Innocent Lives Foundation at innocentlivesfoundation.org. You can follow me on Twitter at Human Hacker. So we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks. See ya.